Welcome to the Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. With vaccination rates steadily on the rise, retailers are now facing the reality of business after lockdown. So, what's going to be different? Today, I dive into brick-and-mortar retail trends with Steve Hart, the founder and CEO of the retail architecture and planning firm, Dead On. With projects all over the world, this North American-based company specializes in designing and optimizing retail spaces for clients such as Polo Ralph Lauren, Cineplex, Loblaws. Steve compares interviews with clients in 2019 with interviews from 2021, identifies changing trends in technology materials, and lays out key takeaways for retailers that are opening their doors again.
You know, until you have a green light, you don't, but you have to anticipate it and plan. But it still helps us just to know something's out there and it may be coming. It helps. And then I would just say, you know, the other thing is that I think a lot of our customers have downsized their internal teams, which kind of, you know, I'd say from an executive level, I think your people are going to need quite a bit of support to pull some of this stuff off. So again, just having those partners or those vendors.
Let's listen in now. Hey, Steve, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
Wonderful, Michael. Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for joining me. A much appreciated part of the retail ecosystem when I think about the physicality in stores. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation. You know, we were talking off mic about how organizations like yourselves and things we do, we want them to make it look easy to the clients, but a tremendous amount of work and experience goes into making it look easy. And I think you're probably the embodiment of that. But anyway, we've kind of jumped right in. Why don't we start a little bit back at the beginning? Tell us about yourself, your personal professional journey, and what you do at Dead On.
Yeah, well, number one, I am the founder and CEO of Dead On. So I started the company when I was 22 years old. You really have nothing to lose when you're that young.
Right.
So
yeah.
I studied architecture at a high school and really always love architecture from the standpoint of how space influences people's experience of anything. And after that, I started working at a millwork company. And that sort of let me really experience everything from initial design, surveying, making sure everything was going to fit, the actual installation process. I saw that from the working side. So that really led me, you know, along that way. And then, you know, like I said, when I started the company when I was 22, I left the millwork company because I had a lot of, you know, I'd like to do it my way in my head and thought I'd take a shot at it. So that's kind of who I am leading into Dead On.
We'll talk about the company today, scope, scale, where you operate, where what kind of clients you have, what obviously retail clients, of course, but, you know, and where you operate, how many people work for you. Give us just a sense of the company.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I'll start with the name. I always get questions about the name Dead On and its origin. It's a little different. It actually came from friends of mine that, you know, working, I always said, you know, a drawing had to be dead on. That's it. And I wasn't doing it to name a company one day. It was just a saying.
Yeah.
So it kind of stuck as the name of a company. So that's sort of the pronunciation of it. But so Dead On has really evolved over the years. When I started when I was 22, really what we were, the company was me for the first 6 years, and I traveled around North America doing surveys. So I did them on my laptop back then. I was really big on, I don't want graph paper and rulers. I want to put it right into CAD, right on site. You know, I can get it much more accurate. I had a lot of ideas on how I could do that. So, you know, over those years, I saw a lot of retail, you know, hands-on in the field, popping ceiling tiles, going on roofs, investigating back of house, front of house, you know, every, you know, not just, you know, the structure, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, but also the layout of the shop. And so just had a really interesting experience of that from, you know, better half of a decade and a half of being out in the field an awful lot. But since then, we've really evolved into more of a full service store planning company. And our evolution really was a pull from our customers who said, it's great, you can get us great surveys, but now can you lay out the store? Because we're a little strapped. And, you know, we had that evolution into that. And really what we've learned with that was probably about 12 or 13, maybe closer to 15 years ago now. The company's 23 years old. We're about 40 employees spread out across Canada and the United States. So we're completely active in both markets. We've actually worked in about 20 countries. We've done rollouts through Europe, Mexico, Caribbean. I wouldn't say, just for listeners, that's not really our focus area. But we took North American customers and we went beyond the borders of North America for specific rollouts.
So is it fair to say that you would go in those international assignments to help your clients based in North America versus trying to go get global business? Is that a fair statement or a fair way to characterize it? Right.
Yeah, and I'd say our definite focus is the North American market. We're based just outside Toronto as our head office, but nowadays, I mean, you could be anywhere.
Sure.
We're just as historically, we've been more active in the United States with projects than Canada just because of the size of the market. But in a nutshell, I would use to describe our company that, our sort of tagline that you'll see when you hit our website is helping brands prepare for, plan, and execute in-store change with confidence. So we're real excited about these conversations. And, I mentioned off air too, I've been a longtime listener of your podcast because I'm really interested to see where retail is going. I'm really excited about the evolutions of it. So.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about how you've made inroads in the U.S. market. I mean, typically it's a crowded market for suppliers, and it's a big market. What is it about your organization that they look to, and how did you crack that market? I think the listeners would be really interested in, and retailers and everyone else be particularly interested in how you came to not just focus, but be successful south of the border.
Yeah, I would say to crack the market. Really just in the early days of Dead On, it was, you got to do what you got to do. I used to just drive a lot from location to location to location. I never really, funny story. Our first big retail customer was Polo Ralph Lauren out of New York. And I literally just cold call, talk to somebody there. He's like, yeah, we need some surveys done. We'll give you a try. And years later, I've known him for now 20 years. He said, man, if I would have known you were a one-person crew, there's no way I would have, right? But you had a website, you call. Anyway, we just started where we just, we'd make contact like that. And then I was lucky enough that kind of that personal intersection of what I'm good at and what I like to do, is I could always see space back and forth from the drawing to real life, back and forth, back and forth. It just came to me. So the idea of going to a location and helping, in this example, someone like Polo Ralph Lauren, you're going to completely build out a new space here. What do you need to know? I could capture a lot of that information and I could do it very accurately. And that it's a nice happenstance that our hallmark over the years, not just in the US, but in Canada, has been our level of quality. That's the number one feedback we get from our customers. And I think when we talked about expansion into the US, it's really expansion into any market. If you offer something that's hard to get, and I don't think, when we first went into the US, I wouldn't say that the site survey industry had a great reputation for very accurate. And we, right from day one, made a promise: if it's wrong, we'll go back and make it right on our dime. And that usually gave them the confidence to go with us. But then, to be honest, it was more word of mouth growth just on the site survey side. And then just by the evolution, like I described earlier, it was retailers coming at us saying, well, you do this pretty well. Can you do that?
Right.
And that's where we really expanded into other areas.
Well, you certainly set the bar high with a name like Dead On. I mean, the expectation is
we did.
You got a brand to live up to there for sure. Let's talk about retail in the before time. You've been operating in retail for almost a quarter century, 23 years or so. And where I'm going with this is I want to get a sense from you what were the trends and what you were being asked to build and what the builds look like pre-COVID. And then now we've all had this experience, and thankfully we're getting to the other side of it. So I want to first start about what you were being asked to do, as I said, pre-COVID, and then try to get some sense. You're the tip of the spear. You're being asked, to do the builds, and what retailers are reflecting on what lessons were learned during COVID or changes of consumer habits that they expect to build differently. So let's start at the beginning. How did you approach it pre-COVID, and what were the big trends?
Yeah, I would say leading up to COVID, and 2019 was kind of the ultimate pre-COVID gauge because we were on quite a growth trajectory. We had introduced many new customers, and we're seeing absolute trends in what everyone was asking for. And we were quite busy and predicting quite a sharp increase again in 2020. But then, as I've been saying, we were kind of rudely interrupted with COVID. But there was some really definitive trends. And I'd say number one was that the technology integration, like touch screens, self-serve checkouts, integrating technology into signage and pricing. That was a fairly universal initiative that was being pushed across not just like QSR, quick service restaurant, but in many retailers as well. So we saw that trend across many of our customers.
It feels like in the early days of that technology, they were kind of orphans in the design.
Oh, yeah.
Right? There was just like a pedestal stuck in the middle somewhere. Maybe it's in the right place, maybe it's in the way, but it didn't feel organic to me. I mean, I ran a Store of the Future program, and that you're just experimenting, but it did feel like, I don't want to say an afterthought, because the technology was starting to take such a big role, but from a design perspective, it must have struck you as kind of even an orphan, or just kind of stuck in the middle somewhere. So I can really relate to how you would be asked to start thinking about how it integrates more deeply and natively, so to speak.
Yeah, and Michael, I would say that the point that came across to us was the internal teams handling store design were not usually the internal teams developing the technology, and they felt almost threatened by it, the in-store folks. That was definitely a trend before that. There was just the beginning of trying to figure out how to integrate the bricks and mortar in-store with online, because leading up to it, like, I've literally been in our customers' offices where, like, there's this adversarial us and them between the online team and the bricks and mortar, like online's trying to eat our lunch kind of idea, instead of, and that's definitely evolved during this period of time. But sticking to the pre-COVID, I think that was, it was the early days, like you said, of, okay, we have this technology, the technology can help us and it works. What does it look like to get it in the store? That was just such a prevalent conversation. And there was lots of different retailers testing and trying different things, but it felt very, like you said, very new. Like everyone was trying to figure it out for the first time.
Yeah.
And I'd say the last piece that was, again, I would say it was starting to pick up some real momentum that we saw from the store planning side was a heavier adoption of modeling, specifically in programs like a Revit, which is like an integration of like a 3D architectural modeling and a database, really trying to mine out more bricks and mortar data points that would inform buyers, would inform other parts of the organization. Because for the most part, what we were talking about was a store planning group that had no resources ever given to maintain the drawings, right? And as people hear me say that, they're going to, yes, of course, right? Like, and that was just so all store planners out there know that is a universal across the board experience, but it really was that kicking the tires of how do we move into Revit and such, and into that sort of data collection. And I was lucky enough to be in many conversations at the executive level, where they were trying to figure it out and go there. And I could talk for an hour on that. I won't go down that, but just as a nugget, I think that was a real big focus across retail, was that shift to a smarter way to design and tell what your store looked like.
We'll unpack that for a little bit. Talk for a minute, if not an hour, about what data points are you talking about? Is it store traffic? Is it flow? What data is the input that is making the output richer?
Yeah, I would say we were looking at it from the angle of more specific to store layouts and the placement and size. I'll give you an example. Like, we have some customers in big box. We have some in QSR, some in banking, some in like all kinds of different industries. But one thing that was pretty prevalent was they really didn't understand at a definite enough level to compare with sales exactly how much space each product type was being given in a store. And its relationship to other things. Because typically what they would have is I always looked at AutoCAD as automated hand drafting. That's what AutoCAD was, right? Like it has some intelligence built into it.
Doing the same thing, just faster, right?
Yes. It's an automation of sort of dumb 2D lines. They don't know what they are. They don't know they're a cabinet. They just know they're a box. The next step from that was moving to try to understand not only the placement, but the size of certain things, how much space departments were taking. I'll give you an example. We did a layout for a major bank brand in the United States several years back, and they came to us, and they have 1,000 locations in this one region of the United States, and they just purchased another bank, and they wanted to renovate the space. And they came to us thinking, we estimate the average, we're going to be about 4,500 square feet a branch. So we're kind of, the old paint and patch approach. We're going to put some new branding, maybe need new carpet, paint, etc.
Right.
And we had to do some fairly simple surveys, I would say, but they got some key information about spaces and what furniture they would need, and so then they could put the plan together to go the rest of the way. And when we actually did that survey and put everything together, the actual average square footage was 8,500 square feet.
It's almost double,
completely
right?
Blew the doors off everything they were trying to do.
Oops.
But they couldn't get that information out of the hodgepodge of drawings they had. So there was I think it was just the data component of the business and how they analyzed sales and such was so advanced but the one area they couldn't advance the way they wanted to was the physical bricks and mortar space. Like, what do we know about it? Right? Like in most cases, and again, this isn't a slight on anyone. It's just kind of our experience. It's pretty rare that someone even has a drawing in CAD that would stand up to the scrutiny of a real survey. Like when someone gives us a drawing, we've gone into brand new stores that were just built and we find walls that are 3 feet off. Right?
That sounds like some of my home renovation stuff.
Yeah.
Sounds
exactly.
familiar. It's interesting. Okay. So now we've got a set of things that are improving. You got some intersection of technology and all that great stuff. Up comes COVID. We've talked about it. My good friend Carl Boutet has talked about it as the great acceleration, moved things forward years. It's certainly, when I think of store design, I can only imagine what retailers are thinking and asking and getting you to build today. But I don't need to imagine. I have you. So tell me what you're hearing and how you see the next short, medium, and long term, and what changes COVID you think has brought on in the store design and in your line of work.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's an interesting question because we actually stopped and made the effort where I reached out in the spring of 2020 to most of our customers. Took some time with them, and I usually requested 15 to 20 minutes and occasionally went over an hour. I was just asking for their perspectives because that's really, I don't sit here and kind of pretend to know what's going on until I get that reflected in our customers and what they're seeing. And when you bring that into aggregate, there was some really cool trends. So for us, the spring of 2020 was a full stop on anything non-essential.
Right.
Like, so obviously the amount of work we were doing, the brakes got hit pretty hard on that.
Yeah.
And luckily we had some customers, some pretty significant customers that were deemed essential, and their essential projects continued. When I sat down and talked to people about, what does the world look like in kind of that June 2020? So we're a few months into it, but we're still, a year ago, we were in a very different headspace than we are now. I'd say the number one thing that kind of came back were, like you said, like this is a great time to accelerate things, that it was described almost as long-term aspirations became short-term opportunities, like tech adoption, right? I had one customer said, we had this whole 5-year plan to get our customers to move more on the tech side of things, and COVID did it in 3 months. Right. So
cultural stuff. You're talking cultural stuff as well, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. But what it was doing from a design standpoint is, we had, in certain cases, we had programs to like on the books to roll out certain store designs or whatever that were completely put on hold, and they're not coming back simply because the tech adoption now, we don't need to teach people how to use the tech. And a lot of things were geared at that. And also the questioning started whether online and bricks and mortar were mortal enemies or not. That really did come up in spring of 2020 because I think most businesses, if you weren't essential, were relying on online a lot more than you ever thought you would this soon.
Yeah.
So that conversation started to come up. And then specifically in store design, it was a lot of a lot of talk about safer stores, because a year ago it was a really like, we're going to have to live with this. And even then, I think the science on, how COVID traveled, I think today there's more science around its airborne and interior spaces is the primary thing. But back then it was heavily believed that it was like surfaces, like you touch that and then I touch that and I can catch it. So there was a lot of talk about what type of materials to use in stores. There was a lot of talk about backing up from touch screens and high touch, like the tech that would allow people to self-serve, that, everybody would be touching. And there was a lot of talk about PPE and how to divide customers from employees with, the plexi we've all seen and different aisles. And it was that was pretty much the main point of conversation in spring of 2020.
Yeah. It was a good year to launch a plexiglass company, I think.
Oh, can you imagine? Yeah, it would have been.
You bring up a really interesting point. I just want to follow for a little bit. I was talking to a retailer last week, and we were just reflecting on lessons learned. And one of the things he mentioned was, and he brought up something I knew but hadn't thought about in the same context. How many people in Canada got the flu or got head colds this year? You can literally count it on. Yeah. It's lower, I believe. It's in the hundreds. It's in the hundreds. Yeah. Like it's next to nothing. And the point he made was, the COVID era may fade, thankfully, thanks to science, if all goes well. But what if, we can have years that go forward, thanks to what we've learned about infection control now, all of us too much to learn some days. Do you think that's going to apply? You've talked about touchscreens, you talked about all these things. So yes, COVID goes away as a life-threatening pandemic, but the flu still comes and goes, and it's quite unpleasant at the best of times. Do you think the lessons are going to be learned about, hey, we should adopt these things and put them into place in different ways? And what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think there are going to be some items that will absolutely affect store design, and I've described it this way. I'd say in the short term, which I'm going to describe as the next 5 years, it'll be mandatory because there'll be a large portion of the population that won't feel safe without them. I mean, I already have the conversation of, like, if tomorrow they said no more masks, we can do whatever we want, I don't know that I'm ready to take off my mask. And I wasn't the first person to put it on either. So it's quite a year later, it's quite a mind change because you wouldn't
know it looking at some of those pictures of Memorial Day in the United States.
Yeah.
My goodness, they
that's a different world for sure.
But you operate in that world too, right? I mean,
yeah, we do.
As you say, it's interesting. You describe the short term as 5 years, so lends me to your perspective. But this thing's not going away globally. 4 years we'll be inoculated, and that kind of 18 months of experience. So go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, just to finish my thought about the sort of the during COVID, because I touched base again in the winter of 2021 and again had those conversations. Now there's sort of the evolved thinking of what stores are going to be and come around to things. And this is even before vaccines were really rolling. The number one thing is that a lot of the store planners we talk to are really wrapping their heads around the customers expect the environment to be different. From a safety standpoint, mostly, but it's also being viewed as a really, if there was anything you wanted to change and try, you probably have a little more leeway in the customer's mind to try it out, maybe even get it wrong and then try it again. Because a customer walking back in, sort of the universal thing that I kept hearing was, we have to do something, because if a customer comes back into our store and it looks exactly the same, it won't be good enough. Because there's been so much change, which was quite a shift in thinking. So now all of a sudden we're in all these conversations about, okay, what does change look like? And then along with that, there's been this, maybe online and bricks and mortar aren't enemies anymore. Maybe they're friends that can play nicely together, which now there's all kinds of talk across our customer base, especially. And some of them were already rolling out things like curbside pickup and such prior, and this accelerated it. But I would say there's a lot more discussion about that retail level fulfillment, whether it's restaurants expanding the back of house to cater to more delivery and more takeout, or it's retailers trying to fill in that last mile delivery, or be more of a fulfillment center and a store to kind of double use that. And I've heard some of your guests talk about the same kind of things, and we're hearing the same. A lot of right sizing retail locations. Maybe the downtown isn't the only place we can go. Maybe the suburb. There's a lot of that, but I would say the consensus now is that there is a boom coming. It just, nobody can pick the date.
Well, I mean, it's a great way to pivot off to my last question for our time here together. And we have listeners who are retailers and listeners who are part of the industry. What advice do you have to retailers about how to get the best out of their partners like yourself? I mean, you've been doing this for 20 plus years. What's your advice on the buy side, the decision makers, the folks who have to put into place the decisions that are made? What are the things you've learned that you would say, listen, if you as clients would do these three things, it'll be 1 + 1 = 3. Like, what would those pieces of advice be?
Yeah, we actually have this conversation with new customers often, because it's kind of startling. And my first one may be startling to some people, but it's have high standards of your suppliers. We actually run into some situations where, we want the push to be better. If somehow we're not hitting the mark exactly, don't take it as something that's just okay, that's good enough. I'd say give good feedback, push the suppliers to be there, because I think, especially in the kind of change that's coming, like, we all win and all lose together, right? Like, as store planners, we don't look good if a store opens later over cost or anything. Like, we don't win, even if the drawing is right. I mean, we don't win. So I'd say just have those high standards and expect the quality and on time to be there. 2, I'd say let's talk early and often. That's the number one. So the number 2 thing I say is the more we know something's coming, and I don't even need a schedule. I know in the world of retail, things move very quickly, but until you have a green light, you don't, but you have to anticipate it and plan. But it still helps us just to know something's out there and it may be coming. It helps. And then I would just say, the other thing is that I think a lot of our customers have downsized their internal teams, which kind of, I'd say from an executive level, I think your people are going to need quite a bit of support to pull some of this stuff off. So again, just having those partners or those vendors that are there to have those conversations with, to provide that support. And finally, it kind of starting to feel a little bit like 2009, 2010, because we experienced that full throttle, where same kind of thing from a business perspective, we got real quiet. And luckily we had, again, a couple of customers that were doing quite well at the time, so we survived it. But the demand of resources is going to get high soon. You can feel it. I mean, talking to construction companies and fixture manufacturers and everything, like, if this thing starts to go, that was the biggest challenge, where, a retailer would want to, okay, it's 2010, times are good, let's roll. It's like, but we can't get the crews to build. Like, we just don't have the
people business, right? It's people, materials, time.
Absolutely.
Doesn't happen overnight.
We know what materials look like these days. So.
Yeah, no kidding. Both supply and time. Well, listen, it's great advice. It's a great way to wrap up our conversation, because it's both a great advice and a good, I wouldn't say warning, but heads up. If a lot of work comes, we can't always get it all done. So tell us in advance, even if you don't have the final details. That's a great way to kind of wrap up advice. Well, listen, where can listeners go to learn more about Dead On and get in touch?
Yeah, I'd say our website is our primary landing spot, deadon.com. It's DEDON. We dropped the A because that's kind of negative, but it's pronounced Dead On, even though it doesn't no word dead in there. Deadon.com. Yeah. And, it gives us a pretty decent overview, but at the same time, Hamza, who is our head of business development, and myself, we basically spend our time talking to customers. So really what we're saying is we just want to talk to you, hear your unique challenges, and there's no real one size fits all, even though, we have a toolbox of things that can apply to almost everybody. So just give us a call.
All right. Well, fantastic. Well, Steve, thanks for coming on The Voice of Retail and allowing me and the listeners to explore this element, all-important element of retail trade. I wish you much continued success, and sounds like a fun journey for the next couple of years as we pull out of this thing. So congratulations again, and thanks for joining me on the podcast.
No, my pleasure, and good luck, everyone. It should be fun.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of The Voice of Retail. Be sure and follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy podcasts, so you don't miss out on the latest episodes, industry news, and insights. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a rating review, as it really helps us grow so that we continue to get amazing guests onto the show. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of Emmy LeBlanc Company, Inc., and if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at emmyleblanc.co. Until next time, stay safe, have a great week.